On a multi-million-dollar construction site in Texas, a $2.8 million excavator breaks down, and after 3 engineers fail to fix it, they call Helena, a humble hydraulic systems mechanic who came from the oil fields. Not even the factory engineer could repair it. "Imagine this girl in a cheap jumpsuit," the foreman mocks in front of 23 technicians. But when Helena opens the machine's panel and notices a detail invisible to any ordinary engineer, she understands this isn't just a malfunction. Someone has turned that excavator into a program bomb, and if she touches the wrong place, it won't just be the project that explodes. But before we get to the moment when everything changed, I need you to know the real Helena. She was 27 years old that September 2025 and carried on her shoulders a life story that most people can't even imagine. Helena was a specialized technician in heavy machinery hydraulic systems, a very rare knowledge that she didn't learn in any air-conditioned university. No, she learned it in the toughest place there is, in the illegal oil drilling sites deep in West Texas. If you're enjoying this story, hit that like button and subscribe to Engines of Hope for more incredible stories like this one. For 5 years of her life, Helena worked maintaining excavators, backhoes, and tractors in conditions that would make any engineer faint with shock, without original parts, without technical manuals, often having to improvise solutions with wire, welding, and lots of intelligence. And you know why a young woman ended up in a place like that? Because at 15, Helena lost her father, a machine operator named Robert, in a terrible workplace accident. The man died, leaving her and 2 younger brothers, Jake and Marcus, who at the time were only 7 and 9 years old. Their mother had abandoned the family years before, so Helena, still a teenager, found herself alone with 2 children to raise. She didn't have time to cry, didn't have time to be a child. She needed to put food on the table, pay rent, make sure the boys went to school. That's how she ended up in the oil fields, lying about her age, accepting any job that paid. And it was there, observing, asking questions, getting her hands dirty, that she discovered a natural talent for understanding machines. After years of struggling, Helena managed to leave the oil fields, got her formal technical certifications, and became an independent consultant. Her brothers, Jake was 19 and Marcus was 21, both studying engineering on scholarships she had fought hard to get them. Everything that woman did was thinking about them. Now let's go to Amarillo, September 2025. There was a huge irrigation project happening there, a multi-million-dollar project that would benefit 200 farming families in the region. It was enormous hope for those people who lived off the land, understand. But there was a serious problem. The project had been completely stopped for 40 days. And you know why? Because of a Komatsu PC800 excavator, a machine that cost $2.8 million, that simply started showing hydraulic system failures that nobody could understand. With each passing day, the project was losing $160,000. Imagine that. And worse, it was close to losing financing from the Regional Development Bank, which would mean the end of everything. The families who were waiting for that irrigation to change their lives would get nothing. The chief engineer responsible for the project was a man named Matthew Norwood, 45 years old. And I need you to understand Matthew to comprehend what happened next. He was technically very competent. He had graduated in civil engineering from Texas A&M University with honors, with excellent grades. But Matthew carried a wound that bled every day. He lived in the shadow of his younger brother, Andrew, an engineer who worked in Germany and was internationally recognized. Every time Matthew achieved something, the family compared it to Andrew. But your brother is already in Europe. Andrew earns in euros. The middle son is the one who really made it. That corroded Matthew from the inside. It created in him a sick need to prove he also had value, to show he was also important. That's why he commanded that project with an iron fist. He didn't accept questioning, didn't tolerate anyone doubting his technical decisions, and there was one more thing Matthew didn't know, but was about to destroy everything. His son, Vincent, 23 years old, was drowning in debts with loan sharks because of addiction to online sports betting, a debt of $295,000 that was growing every day with absurd interest. But Matthew had no idea about this. When Helena arrived at that construction site on a Friday morning, wearing her navy blue work jumpsuit and carrying her specialized toolbox that she herself had assembled over the years, Matthew looked at her with that poorly disguised contempt you can feel from afar. She had been called on the recommendation of a contact of Edmund Fisher, the construction company owner, who was desperate to solve the problem. But when Matthew saw a young woman with a simple appearance, he simply decided it was a waste of time. "Are you the technician?" he asked, and you could already feel the venom in that tone. Helena responded yes, politely, and explained she needed an hour to examine the excavator. 1 hour, that's all she was asking for. Matthew crossed his arms and spoke with that voice of someone talking to a stubborn child. "Look, miss, I've already had 3 specialized engineers from Komatsu itself here. Technicians came from Houston, from Dallas, people with master's degrees, with years of experience. And you think you're going to solve what they couldn't?" Helena kept calm because she had been through this before. She knew this type of man. "Mr. Matthew," she said, "I'm just asking for a chance to look. If I don't find anything in 1 hour, I'll leave and won't charge anything for the trip." But Matthew didn't want to hear it. "I can't risk someone without adequate credentials causing more damage to $2.8 million equipment. Understand? This is serious business, not backyard play." And then he started questioning her certifications, asked to see diplomas, insinuated she might have bought fake documents, suggested she was only there to take advantage of the desperate situation. Helena felt her blood boil, but took a deep breath. She showed all her documents, all her certifications, records of previous work, but you could see Matthew had already decided he wasn't going to give her a chance. In his head, a young woman, technician, and not an engineer who had worked in oil fields, simply couldn't know more than men trained at state universities. What Matthew didn't know, my friends, was that Helena had seen and solved problems he couldn't even imagine existed. While he studied theory in comfortable classrooms, she was getting her hands dirty, keeping machines running in the middle of nowhere without resources, having to invent solutions no book taught. But at that moment, standing in front of that man who looked at her with contempt, Helena didn't yet know she was about to uncover something much bigger and darker than a simple mechanical problem. And Matthew, who thought he was protecting his project and his reputation, had no idea he was about to have his entire life turned upside down. Comment below where you're watching from. We love hearing from our Engines of Hope community around the world. You won't believe what Matthew did in the following days. That man wasn't satisfied with just denying Helena access to the excavator. No. He decided he was going to completely destroy her reputation, ensure she never set foot on that construction site again. The following Monday, Matthew called a meeting with the 23 engineers and technicians on the project. Helena was staying at a simple motel in downtown Amarillo, waiting for a response, when she received a message saying her presence was mandatory at a 2 p.m. meeting. She thought it was strange, but went thinking maybe Matthew had changed his mind. When she entered that meeting room, she felt something heavy in the air. All the men were seated, and Matthew was standing in front of a projector. He looked at Helena with a smile that didn't reach his eyes and said, "Good that you came. Please, sit down." And then, my friends, began one of the cruelest scenes you can imagine. Matthew opened a presentation on the computer and started talking, looking at the other engineers, not at Helena. "Gentlemen, Before we proceed with any decision about external consultants, I made it a point to do a background investigation. It's our duty, after all. We're dealing with multi-million-dollar equipment and public resources. Helena felt her heart race. Investigation. She had nothing to hide, but already had a bad feeling. Matthew clicked on the computer, and a photo of Helena appeared on the screen, taken without her knowledge, next to a text. He began to read aloud. Helena Tavares, 27 years old, was fired from 3 previous jobs for serious technical incompetence. In 2022, in Houston, Texas, she caused the collapse of a crane during a maintenance operation, resulting in a loss of $2.4 million for the contracting company. Helena stood up from her chair. That's a lie. I never worked with cranes in Houston. This is completely false. But Matthew continued, completely ignoring her. In 2023, in Dallas, she was removed from a construction project after performing unauthorized repairs on a concrete mixer, causing structural damage to the equipment. The company filed a lawsuit for breach of contract. That didn't happen, Helena shouted, and can you imagine the desperation in her voice? I was never in Dallas in 2023. Where did you get this information? Matthew then projected what appeared to be official documents with stamps, signatures, everything very well done. I have here copies of lawsuits still pending against you. 3 lawsuits for material damages, all related to poorly executed technical work. He looked at the other engineers with a serious expression. Gentlemen, do you understand my concern in allowing this person to approach our excavator? The men in the room began to murmur among themselves, looking at Helena with suspicion and even disgust. One of them, an older engineer named George Carter, asked, "But are these documents authentic? Were they verified?" Matthew answered with conviction, I hired an accountant to do the complete verification, everything notarized. It was a lie. All of that was a lie. Matthew had paid a corrupt accountant named Mario Bennett to fabricate those false documents. He spent $13,000 on those forgeries, but in his mind it was worth every penny to get rid of Helena before she discovered something he was hiding. Helena was trembling with anger and humiliation. This is defamation. I'm going to sue you for slander. These documents are forged. But the more she protested, the more she seemed like a desperate person trying to hide the truth. Matthew had planned everything perfectly. You may leave now, Matthew said coldly. And if you try to approach the construction site or any of our equipment, I will take appropriate legal measures. Helena left that room with tears of rage in her eyes, hearing the whispers of the engineers. What an absurdity to have called her here. Imagine the damage she could have caused. Women like that give a bad name to serious professionals. In the following days, the humiliation only got worse. Matthew spread that story to all the workers at the site. When Helena tried to enter to speak with someone from administration, security guards stopped her. Machine operators who used to greet her now looked at her with suspicion. She became a pariah, a dangerous figure who needed to be kept away. But Helena wasn't the type to give up easily, my friends. She had raised 2 brothers working in illegal oil fields. She had survived situations that would break most people. She knew those documents were fake and that there was something very wrong with that whole story. From her motel room, she began to investigate. She called the supposed companies where she would have been fired. None had any record of her. She checked the lawsuit numbers. They didn't exist. Everything was a lie, and she could prove it. But why would Matthew do this? Pure sexism, or was there something more? Helena managed, through a contact at City Hall, who had worked with her on another project, to access the public technical reports of the project. They were documents any citizen could request, so there was nothing illegal about it. And it was there, reading page by page, that she began to see strange inconsistencies. The excavator had started showing problems 4 months ago, but the reports showed it had undergone complete preventive maintenance just 2 weeks before the failures began. Even stranger, in the last 6 months, the project had spent $780,000 on replacement parts for that single machine. That was absurd. A new, well-maintained excavator shouldn't need almost $1 million in parts in half a year. She grabbed her laptop and started making a spreadsheet, crossing the maintenance dates with the parts purchase dates. And then she saw a pattern. All the parts came from the same supplier, a company called Meyer and Associates Industrial Parts Trading. The owner was someone named Oscar Meyer. Helena researched this company and discovered it was relatively new, only 3 years old, but was already supplying several large projects in the Southwest. The prices they charged were 40% above market average. Why would a project with a tight budget choose the most expensive supplier? When Helena tried to share this information, tried to talk to other engineers on the team, show the numbers, Matthew found out, and he became even more aggressive. On Thursday of that week, he gathered the team again and publicly accused Helena of trying to sabotage the project. "This woman is spreading lies about our parts acquisitions," he said, banging his hand on the table. "She's trying to create a climate of distrust so she can later offer herself as the savior. It's a dirty tactic of unscrupulous people who want to promote themselves at the expense of the serious work of competent professionals." One of the engineers, Robert Simpson, who had heard Helena trying to explain about the inconsistencies, raised his hand. "But Matthew, the numbers she showed make sense. Maybe it's worth reviewing." "Are you doubting my management, Robert?" Matthew cut him off with a dangerously low voice. "Do you think I, graduated from Texas A&M with 20 years of experience, don't know how to do proper purchasing control? All acquisitions followed legal procedures. There are 3 comparative budgets, everything documented. If you want to question my competence, you can resign now." Robert lowered his head. No one else said anything. The message was clear. Whoever supported Helena was against Matthew, and Matthew controlled who stayed or left that project. Don't forget to subscribe to Engines of Hope and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next part of this incredible story. On Friday, the site supervisor, pressured by Matthew, personally delivered Helena a formal notification. She was prohibited from entering the site, and if she insisted, the police would be called and she would be charged with trespassing. Helena read that notification, sitting on a bench in the square in front of the site, watching workers come and go. She thought about her brothers, Jake and Marcus, who were counting on the money from that job to pay for college next semester. She thought about the 1-200 families waiting for that irrigation. She thought about her father, Robert, who had died in an accident that could have been avoided if someone had listened to his warnings about a mechanical problem. That night, Helena didn't sleep. She opened her laptop and started doing something she had learned in the oil fields. Investigating not just the technical problem, but the people involved. She researched Oscar Meyer, the parts company owner. She found photos of him at social events, always very well dressed, always with politicians and businessmen. She researched Matthew Norwood, read old interviews with him, saw family photos, and it was in one of those photos that she saw something interesting. Matthew at a graduation event, next to a young man about 23 years old. The caption said, "Engineer Matthew Norwood with son Vincent at his business administration graduation." Helena zoomed in on the photo. There was something in that young man's look, a tension, a fear. By intuition, she searched the full name, Vincent Norwood, and found something that made her heart race. Posts in online forums about sports betting, using a nickname she managed to trace back to the young man's email. Desperate posts, asking for tips, talking about debts, about needing to recover losses. Helena realized she had found something important, but still didn't know what it meant. What she didn't imagine was that she was about to discover a truth that went beyond a simple, broken excavator. There was a criminal scheme happening right under everyone's noses. And Matthew wasn't just a prejudiced man trying to protect his ego. He was hiding something much darker, something that was devouring him from the inside, and that explained why he was so afraid of someone competent taking a close look at that equipment. My dear friends, now we come to the moment when everything started to change. Helena spent 3 nights practically without sleeping, analyzing every detail she could find about that project, about the excavator, about the parts purchased. And it was in the early hours of Sunday into Monday that she had a revelation that made everything make sense. She was looking for the 10th time at the maintenance reports when she noticed something any traditional engineer would completely ignore. The excavator failures were always intermittent. The machine would show a problem, technicians would arrive to diagnose, and when they connected the test equipment, everything would go back to working perfectly, as if the problem disappeared at the exact moment someone was going to investigate. And that's when her experience in the oil field started screaming in her head. In the illegal oil drilling sites in Texas, it was common for workers to install pirate chips in equipment to bypass machine power limiters. These devices were hidden inside the electronic system and made the machine work beyond original capacity. But Helena had seen cases where these chips were programmed to cause intentional failures, a form of sabotage used between rival operations. She jumped out of bed. What if someone had installed a sabotage chip in that excavator, a device that caused programmed failures that disappeared before technicians could diagnose? Would make total sense. No traditional engineer would think of this, because this type of electronic sabotage isn't taught in university. It's knowledge from those who lived in the underworld of tampered machines. Helena went back to her laptop and started researching more sophisticated sabotage chips. She discovered there were devices on the black market that could be programmed to cause intermittent failures in hydraulic systems. And worse, these chips could be configured to, after a certain time, cause a catastrophic terminal failure that would completely destroy the system. She grabbed her phone and called an old colleague from the oil fields, an electronics technician named David, who had worked with this type of equipment. It was 6 a.m. on a Monday, but she needed this information. David answered with a sleepy voice. "Helena, what time is it?" "David, I need you to explain something urgent," she said, and started describing the excavator's failure pattern. "Is it possible it's a sabotage chip?" On the other end of the line, she heard David get serious. "Possible? That has all the hallmarks of programmed sabotage, Helena. These more modern chips are configured to be invisible to normal scanners. They cause interference in the electrical flow of the hydraulic system. But when they detect diagnostic equipment has been connected, they enter hibernation mode." "And how long until terminal failure?" Helena asked, feeling a chill. "Depends on the programming. Could be weeks, could be months, but when it happens, it's catastrophic. The entire hydraulic system can explode if someone is operating the machine at that moment." Helena didn't need him to finish the sentence. This wasn't just financial fraud. It was something that could kill people. She knew she couldn't keep trying to convince the project engineers. She needed to speak directly with the construction company owner, Edmund Fisher. But how to get an audience with an important businessman when her reputation had been destroyed by Matthew? Helena remembered seeing Edmund at the meeting where she was humiliated. He was present, but hadn't actively participated in her condemnation. Maybe, just maybe, he would listen. She found the address of the construction company's central office in Amarillo and went there unannounced at 8 a.m. The receptionist looked at her with that expression we already know. A simple woman in a jumpsuit, wanting to speak with the company owner. "Do you have an appointment?" the girl asked coldly. "No, but I need to speak with Mr. Edmund about the excavator at the irrigation project. It's urgent, a matter of life or death." The receptionist rolled her eyes. "Everyone says it's urgent. I'll write down your name, and if Mr. Edmund has time..." Tell him the excavator is going to explode in less than 48 hours, Helena said, looking directly into the girl's eyes. Say exactly that, and that I know who's sabotaging the equipment and why. Something in Helena's voice, in the absolute seriousness of what she was saying, made the receptionist pick up the internal phone. She spoke quietly with someone, then looked at Helena. He'll see you. 3rd floor, room 301. Edmund Fisher was 62 years old, completely white hair, and had that way about him of a man who had seen a lot in life. When Helena entered his office, he was standing, looking out the window. You have 2 minutes, he said, without turning around. My secretary said you talked about an explosion. I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt because you seem like a serious woman. But if it's a waste of time, I'll have security escort you out. Helena took a deep breath and started talking. She explained about the sabotage chips that existed on the black market, about how she had seen this type of equipment in the oil fields, about the pattern of intermittent failures that didn't make mechanical sense. She showed on her tablet the spreadsheet she had made with the dates, the amount spent on parts, everything organized. And why would someone do this? Edmund asked, finally turning to look at her. Because every time the machine breaks, you need to buy new parts, hire more maintenance. You've spent $780,000 in 6 months on a machine that was new. That's not normal. Someone is making a lot of money keeping this excavator broken. Helena paused and looked directly at Edmund. And I think Engineer Matthew knows about this. That's why he's so afraid of letting me examine the equipment. Edmund was silent for long seconds. Helena could see he was processing, calculating. Finally, he asked, Can you prove this? Give me access to the excavator for 1 hour. Just 1 hour. If I don't find anything, I'll leave Amarillo today and never come back. But if I'm right, that machine could explode at any moment and kill the operator. Edmund picked up the phone. Mark, gather all the engineers from the irrigation project at the site in 1 hour. Everyone without exception. Tell them it's my order. He hung up and looked at Helena. I'll give you your chance, but it'll be in front of everyone. If you're wrong, you'll leave there much worse than you came in. An hour later, Helena was back at the construction site, but this time accompanied by Edmund himself. Matthew was there with the 23 engineers, and his face turned red when he saw Helena. What is this woman doing here? I prohibited her entry. I authorized it, Edmund said with a firm voice. She's going to examine the excavator now. Edmund, I explained about her history, about the lawsuits, about... Matthew began, but Edmund raised his hand. Matthew, you're going to be quiet and let her work. We'll talk later. The tone left no room for discussion. Helena walked to the excavator with her toolbox. Her hand trembled a little, not from fear, but from pure adrenaline. She knew exactly where to look. In the oil fields, sabotage chips were always hidden in the hydraulic system control module, inside a component that no normal technician would disassemble without a very specific reason. She opened the control panel, removed the external protection, and started disassembling the main module. The engineers watched in silence. Matthew was pale, sweating cold. 12 minutes later, Helena found it. It was a small chip, no bigger than a quarter, connected to the hydraulic system wires. A professional device, well installed, practically invisible unless you knew exactly what to look for. Helena carefully removed it with tweezers and held it up high for everyone to see. This here is a programmable sabotage chip, she said, and her voice echoed in the absolute silence of the site. It causes intermittent failures in the hydraulic system and is programmed to shut off when it detects diagnostic equipment. That's why nobody could find the problem. She looked at Matthew, who was practically shaking. And this chip has a serial number. We can trace who manufactured it, who sold it, who installed it. One of the engineers, George Carter, approached and took the chip from her hands, examining it carefully. My God, he murmured. She's right. This is industrial sabotage. Edmund's face was set. Call the FBI now. He looked at Helena. Can you trace that serial number? I already did, Helena said, grabbing her tablet. This specific model is manufactured in China and distributed by only 3 companies in the US. One of them is based here in the Southwest. She showed the screen to Edmund. Meyer and Associates Industrial Parts Trading. The name fell in the air like a bomb. It was the same supplier that had sold replacement parts to the project. $780,000 in 6 months. Matthew staggered and had to lean on the excavator. All eyes turned to him. "Matthew," Edmund said with a dangerously calm voice, "do you have anything to say?" And it was at that moment, my friends, that the house of cards began to crumble, because the truth is impossible to hide when it finally comes to light. Helena had unraveled the mechanical mystery, but was about to discover there was a much more painful human mystery behind it all. A story about a desperate father, about blackmail, about how fear can make even good people make terrible decisions. Matthew looked at all those accusing faces, looked at Helena, and something inside him simply broke. He wasn't going to be able to sustain the lie one more second. You need to understand that what happened there at that construction site was one of the most intense scenes I've ever heard of in my life. All those engineers, the workers who had stopped to see what was happening, Edmund with that look of someone about to explode with rage, and Helena in the middle of it all holding that tiny chip that proved the sabotage. Matthew was leaning against the excavator, his face completely white, sweating even with the cool morning breeze in Amarillo. His hands were shaking so much he had to put them in his pockets so nobody would notice. But it was too late. Everyone had already seen. "Matthew," Edmund repeated, and this time his voice was loaded with deep disappointment. "Say what you know about this." And then Matthew did something nobody expected. He started to cry. A 45-year-old man, chief engineer, always so rigid and controlling, collapsed there in front of everyone. It wasn't a discreet cry, no, my friends. It was a desperate cry from someone who had been carrying an impossible weight alone. "I didn't want to," he said between sobs, and his voice was so broken you could barely understand. "I swear to God I didn't want to do this, but they were going to kill my son. They were going to kill Vincent." The silence that fell over that place was absolute. Even the wind seemed to stop blowing. Helena felt her heart squeeze in her chest. She had imagined corruption, greed, but not this. Edmund approached Matthew. "Explain properly now." And Matthew started telling everything, every detail of that terrible story he had kept to himself for months. He told that 3 months ago he had discovered his son Vincent had a debt of $295,000 with loan sharks because of sports betting addiction. The young man had developed a terrible addiction. He had started betting small amounts, but kept losing, and trying to recover the losses with even bigger bets. "I didn't know anything," Matthew said, wiping tears with the back of his hand. "Vincent hid it from me. He was ashamed, you understand. And when the debt reached that amount, the loan sharks started threatening. They sent photos to his cell phone, photos of our house, of his car, of the college where he studied. They said they were going to cut off his fingers, one by one, until the debt was paid." Helena felt a knot in her throat. She knew this type of people. She had seen a lot in the oil fields. Matthew continued, and the story got darker and darker. He told that he was desperate, trying to sell the car, the house, everything he had, but it didn't even come close to the $295,000. And then Oscar Meyer, the parts company owner, appeared in his life like a saving angel. "Oscar approached me at a bar where I was trying to think of some solution," Matthew said. "He said he knew about Vincent's situation, that he had contacts with the loan sharks and could make the debt disappear completely without me needing to pay a cent." "And what did he want in return?" Edmund asked, but already knew the answer. "That I let him supply parts for the project? That I didn't ask questions about the prices? That I approved all his purchases? And that—" Matthew swallowed hard. That I let his technicians install the chip in the excavator. He said it was just to ensure parts would continue to be needed. He promised me it wouldn't hurt anyone, that it was just to delay the project a bit, generate need for maintenance. One of the engineers, Robert Simpson, said angrily, "Matthew, didn't you see this could kill someone? This type of sabotage can cause an explosion." "I didn't know," Matthew shouted back, and the desperation in his voice was real. "Oscar told me it was safe, that it was just an electronic thing that would cause minor failures. I didn't know it could explode. When you tell me that now, He covered his face with his hands. "My God, I could have killed someone. I could have killed an innocent operator." Helena was processing all of that. The anger she had felt toward Matthew started mixing with something more complicated. Pity, understanding. She knew what it was like to make impossible decisions when the people you love are in danger. When she was 15 and needed to feed 2 small brothers, she had done things she wasn't proud of either. "And why did you do all that to me?" Helena asked, her voice coming out softer than she expected. "Why did you invent those lies? Humiliate me like that?" Matthew looked at her with red eyes. "Because I was afraid. When you arrived and said you wanted to examine the machine, I panicked. You seemed too competent, too determined. I thought if you looked closely, you'd discover the chip, and if you discovered it, the whole truth would come out. The loan sharks would go back after Vincent, so I—" He shook his head, disgusted with himself. "I destroyed your reputation to keep you away, paid to forge documents, spread lies, made you look like a fraud, so nobody would believe anything you said." "You called me incompetent," Helena said, and now there were tears in her eyes too. "You made me look like a criminal in front of everyone. Do you have any idea how much that hurt? I spent years building my reputation, proving that a woman can be just as good as any man in this profession, and you destroyed everything in one slide presentation." "I know," Matthew said and started crying again. "I know, and there's no forgiveness for what I did to you. I'm a coward, a weak man who sacrificed an innocent person's dignity to protect my son." He looked at Edmund. "I accept any consequence. Call the police. Sue me. Do whatever you have to do. I deserve it." Edmund had his arms crossed, face set. "The FBI is already on their way. Matthew, you're going to answer for all of this. But first I want to understand one thing. Where's Vincent now?" "At home," Matthew answered with a weak voice. "He doesn't know anything about this. When Oscar cancelled the debt, I told Vincent I had gotten a bank loan. My son has no idea that the price of his freedom was me becoming a criminal." Helena approached Matthew, and everyone was surprised. She stood there in front of him for a moment, just looking. Then she said, "You were wrong. Very wrong. You hurt me in a way I don't know if I'll be able to completely overcome." But she took a deep breath. "I understand why you did it. If someone threatened my brothers, I don't know how far I'd go to protect them." Matthew looked at her as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "How can you have compassion for me after what I did?" "Because I've been desperate too," Helena said simply. "Because I know what it's like to be cornered with no way out. The difference is, I was lucky to never have to choose between my morals and the lives of the people I love." She paused, and then said something that made everyone there stop to think. "You're not bad, Matthew. You're a terrified father who made terrible decisions. That doesn't make what you did right, but it makes you human." George Carter, the older engineer who had been quiet until then, finally spoke. "Helena, you have a much bigger heart than most of us here. After everything you went through, you can still have empathy." The FBI arrived half an hour later, along with investigators specialized in economic crimes. Matthew told everything again, gave names, showed documents, bribery payments, everything. He cooperated completely. The investigators went after Oscar Mayer, who tried to flee to Mexico but was arrested at the border. The investigation revealed the scheme was much bigger than just that project. Oscar had installed sabotage chips in equipment at 7 different projects in 4 southwestern states, generating artificial need for maintenance and overcharging for parts. He had made over $4.2 million from the scheme. Matthew was just one of the victims he had coerced, using debts, threats, emotional blackmail. Helena testified in Matthew's favor at trial. She explained to the judge that he was under coercion, that his son's life was at risk, that he cooperated fully when the truth came out. Because of her testimony and Matthew's complete cooperation with justice, he received a lighter sentence, 4 years of alternative penalty, providing community service teaching construction to young people from disadvantaged communities, plus prohibition from signing projects as responsible engineer for 5 years. Vincent, when he found out everything, had an emotional breakdown. He couldn't believe his father had become a criminal because of him, but with justice intervention and social workers, he was referred for specialized treatment for gambling addiction. The debt was officially cancelled and the loan sharks were arrested for extortion and racketeering. If this story is touching your heart, give it a like and subscribe to Engines of Hope. Comment where you're watching from. We have viewers from all over the world. My dear friends, now I'm going to tell you what happened 18 months after that day that changed so many people's lives. Because the best stories don't end with the revelation of truth. They end by showing what people do with the second chances life offers. It was March 2027 and Amarillo was celebrating. After all those months of delays, investigations, replacement of sabotaged equipment and a lot of work, the irrigation project was finally complete. And on that sunny Saturday morning, over 2,000 people gathered for the official inauguration of the system that would forever change the lives of 200 farming families in the region. Helena Tavares was on the stage set up in the center of the new irrigation system, and if you had seen her that day, you'd barely recognize the humiliated woman who had been expelled from the construction site 18 months before. She wore an elegant navy blue suit, hair pulled back in a professional bun, and carried on her shoulders the title of Director of the Heavy Equipment Division of Edmund Fisher's Construction Company. That's right. The woman who had been treated like a fraud, who had false documents spread about her, now supervised 10 simultaneous projects in 4 southwestern states. She commanded a team of 47 engineers and technicians, many of them men much older than her, and had become a national reference in hydraulic systems for heavy machinery. But it wasn't just Helena's professional career that had changed. Her brothers, Jake and Marcus, were seated in the front row of that event, both wearing their graduation gowns. Jake had graduated in mechanical engineering and Marcus in electrical engineering, both with honors, both already with job offers, and the two were already planning to open a technical consulting company together with their sister, a dream she'd had since they were little that was finally becoming reality. But there's another person I need to tell you about on that day. Next to Helena, on stage, wearing a simple construction company technician uniform, was Matthew Norwood. Yes, the same Matthew who had destroyed her reputation, who had lied, who had participated in a criminal scheme. But this Matthew was completely different from that bitter and controlling man from 18 months ago. Matthew now worked as Helena's direct technical assistant, a subordinate position, manual labor without decision-making power. And he accepted this with genuine humility that impressed everyone who knew him. 3 times a week after work, he went to disadvantaged communities to teach construction to at-risk youth, part of his alternative sentence that he fulfilled with real dedication, not just as a legal obligation. The relationship between Helena and Matthew had transformed into something nobody expected, mutual respect built on brutal honesty. She didn't pretend she had forgotten what he did. He didn't pretend he deserved forgiveness. But both had chosen to move forward, working together, proving that people can change when they really want to. And there was more. Vincent, Matthew's son, was also present at that inauguration. The young man, now 25, worked in the construction company's administrative sector, taking care of equipment logistics. He was completing a year and a half without making a single bet, religiously attended support group meetings for gambling addicts, and had become a volunteer, helping other young people fighting the same addiction. The relationship between Matthew and Vincent had been completely rebuilt. They didn't hide anything from each other anymore. They talked about mistakes, about fears, about temptations. Vincent had told his father months ago something Matthew carried in his heart. "Dad, you were wrong trying to save me the wrong way, but I also messed up putting you in that situation. We messed up together, and now we're going to fix it together." When it was Helena's turn to speak, the state governor introduced her talking about competence, determination, and how she had saved not just a project, but had helped dismantle a criminal scheme that was harming public works throughout the Southwest. The crowd gave her a standing ovation when she approached the microphone. Helena looked at those 200 farming families who would finally have access to adequate irrigation, looked at her brothers in the front row with tears of pride in their eyes, looked at Matthew at her side on stage, and began to speak. "When I arrived in Amarillo 18 months ago," she said, and her voice echoed through the speakers, "I was just another technician trying to do her job. I was humiliated, defamed, expelled. Many people here present saw that happen." She paused. "But I learned something important. Truth always finds a way. True talent doesn't need a diploma hanging on the wall to prove its value. It proves itself in work, in dedication, in not giving up even when everything seems lost." Helena looked directly at the women in the audience. Farmers, workers, mothers. To every woman who has been underestimated for being a woman, who has heard this isn't work for you, who has had to prove her competence 3 times more than any man, don't give up. The world is changing slowly, but it is. And each one of us who stays firm, who shows our capability, who refuses to accept prejudice, is helping to change it. She took a deep breath before continuing. "But this story isn't just about me. It's also about second chances. It's also about a man who made terrible mistakes, but who had the courage to admit it, to cooperate with justice, to rebuild his life honestly." She gestured to Matthew at her side. "Matthew Norwood hurt me deeply. He knows it. I know it. Everyone here knows it, but he also taught me something, that recognizing a mistake is harder than never making one, that truly changing requires a courage few have." Matthew had tears running down his face, but didn't hide them. He had learned that vulnerability wasn't weakness. "This irrigation project," Helena continued, pointing to the system around them, "is going to change the lives of 200 families, will allow farmers to plant year-round, to sustain their communities, to give a better future to their children. And this happened because many people didn't give up when everything seemed impossible. It happened because truth won over lies. It happened because we chose redemption instead of revenge." She paused and looked at Amarillo's blue sky. "My father, Robert Tavares, died when I was 15 in an accident that could have been avoided if someone had listened to his warnings about a mechanical problem. I promised that day I would honor his memory by doing the job right, saving lives through technical competence." "Dad," she said, and now she was crying too, "I hope I made you proud." The crowd exploded in applause. Farmers, engineers, politicians, workers, all standing, giving an ovation to that extraordinary woman who had unraveled a mystery and in the process had shown that the greatest strength isn't in never falling, but in choosing how to get up. After the ceremony, while families explored the new irrigation system and celebrated, Helena and Matthew stood for a moment alone near one of the water distribution towers. "Thank you," Matthew said simply, "for believing I could be better than my worst mistakes." Helena looked at him and smiled. a small smile but genuine. We're more than the worst thing we've ever done, Matthew. You taught me that too. Now let's work. We have 3 new projects starting next week, and I'm going to need your technical knowledge. And so, my dear friends, ends this story that began with humiliation and ended with redemption. A story that reminds us that competence has no gender, that second chances are possible when there's courage to truly change, and that the greatest mysteries we need to unravel sometimes aren't in broken machines, but within ourselves, in our prejudices, in our fears, in our capacity to forgive and start over. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button, subscribe to Engines of Hope, and share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. Comment below where you're watching from. We love our global community. See you in the next story.